when we understand what we are good at naturally, then it truly is a part of us. And raising that awareness level helps us sit with what we're good at.
You're listening to the Lowdown Podcast, brought to you by Sigma Kappa National Headquarters staff. We'll focus on topics like health, wellness, the fraternity and sorority community, higher education, and life skills that women need in all stages of their lives. We'll also feature stories from inspiring and empowering Sigma Kappas. Check out the Sigma Kappa website for regular updates and new episodes.
Hi, and welcome back to the Lowdown Podcast. I'm Morgan Negri.
And I'm Meredith Trapper.
And today we're here with Hannah Beatty and Casey Keller. So Hannah, we've never had Hannah on the podcast before, but we're actually really excited to introduce her as one of our new guest hosts. Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Morgan and Meredith, and Casey, of course. My name is Hannah Beatty. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a graduate of the University of Florida. Obligatory Go Gators. I am initiate of our Beta Tau chapter. You can see my orange and blue streamers in the background. Fortunately, you can't hear them. But I joined staff a year ago this week, actually. So it's my 1 year anniversary as a collegiate support specialist. I love what I do. I get to work with our collegiate chapters on all things collegiate management, leadership development. Very excited to support our chapter members for another year.
That's awesome. And then we're also here with Casey Keller, who is our executive director of the Housing Corporation. So Casey, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And Hannah, I'm excited for this podcast. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Super fun. I'm Casey. I have been with the NHC for the past 9 years, which is pretty hard to believe. It's been 9 years. It seems like it's been a lifetime some days, and then other days it's been a blink of an eye. So I have the fun of building and remodeling houses. I'm an alumna initiate, so I did not have an undergraduate experience, and that has been super fun to learn the ins and outs of Sigma Kappa in a exciting way through collegiate members, but also through our volunteers and how they see Sigma Kappa and sometimes what they take for granted, because I have a lot of questions that they just have these amazing answers. And sometimes they raise that eyebrow at me like, how do you not know this? I'm like, well, I didn't have the same experience that you did. So it's great to get to know Sigma Kappa in a different way because of my experience with it.
Absolutely. I think Morgan and I can relate to that, also not being Sigma Kappas ourselves, but have grown to love the organization and having that alumni initiate experience. I just love the variety that we have on staff and the different backgrounds that we bring to the table.
Yeah, it's great. So today we're going to talk about Clifton Strengths. So we thought it would be good for our listeners if we could go around and individually say ours. Maybe you can relate to them if you don't know yours. Some of these might stand out to you. So for me, my strengths are positivity, ideation, connectedness, includer, and intellection.
Yeah, and mine are communication, woo, positivity, arranger, and relator.
Mine are strategic, maximizer, responsibility, relator, and learner.
And to wrap things up, mine are input, intellection, strategic, learner, and achiever. So very heavy on the strategic thinking domain.
That's awesome.
Great. So Casey, just to kind of kick us off, for those of you who don't know, Casey is a certified coach in the Clifton Strength Finder. So if you could just give us a little bit of a background on what first made you want to be a coach in this, and then also why Sigma Kappa utilizes strengths.
Absolutely. So my first job out of college, I worked for a service organization here in Indianapolis, and I had a boss who the very first day on the job said, hey, you're going to be successful if you are more like Robert. And I kind of looked at my boss and said, okay, well, what is Robert like? What does he do? And what about me makes you think that I will be like Robert? You know, I'm a very inquisitive person. Again, I lead with learner. And so I have lots of questions all the time. And my boss just looked at me and said, just figure it out. Just be more like Robert. And that really did not sit well with me. And so
I don't think it would sit well with all of us.
Yeah, it's not very helpful.
So I just thought, man, okay, well, I'm a new employee. I need to figure it out. And so I watched Robert and I thought, okay, Robert seems like a really good employee. He does his work. He's on time. He, is a snappy dresser. I, and so, but what I also noticed about Robert was that he didn't think like I did. He definitely didn't ask questions in meetings. I'm a note taker. He didn't take notes. And he also didn't challenge anything. And these were the things that I thought were really great about me, that when I'm engaged and in a meeting, I want to know more. I like to dig in. And I thought, okay, I could be a lot like Robert in some respects, but then in other areas, man, we are so far apart. Obviously, there were big differences, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Robert, Casey, we have some differences. He also was an older gentleman. He was a grandfather. A 22-year-old college graduate who, fresh out of college, had never had a professional environment. And so I just got to thinking about what really was bothering me. And I think it was because right off the bat, my boss wasn't interested in what I was good at, wasn't interested at
Yeah.
all in knowing me. And that didn't sit well with me, just really didn't. And so it took me several years to figure out what tools I had around me to help other people really understand me. I was fortunate that same boss was supportive of me in that I was promoted quickly. I got to be in leadership positions. So I don't want to say that he was not a good boss. I mean, that's not it. He just was not interested in really digging into what makes me the best in my environment, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
He wanted to give me a model that he thought would work everywhere, right? Like kind of a cook that doesn't work for me because again, I lead with strategic and maximizer. And so those things, like I'll just figure things out, but I also, something good in my mind can be great. It can be phenomenal with little tweaks. So in the early 2000s, I had the good fortune to run across a leadership program that I got to participate in, and they were using one of the first iterations of the Strengths Finder assessment. I got to take it. I got to learn that my top 5 strengths are again strategic, maximizer, responsibility, relator, learner, and I was like, oh my goodness,
Light bulb.
and this report that I got, someone wrote this. They had to have been sitting in my brain using my words that I didn't even realize I had, but I knew were there. And just the articulation of these strengths, of these natural talents. And so I was sold from that point on. And I kept saying at that place where I worked for 13 years, we have to use this. We have to use this. We have to use this. And it wasn't until I left that the finally year they adopted it, but which is fine.
No way.
Yes.
That was your parting gift.
And
Yeah.
my party they adopted it as their oh my goodness, as their employee development tool. So that was phenomenal, though, that they did adopt it. And I am happy to say, many decades later, it seems they are still using it.
That's
And
awesome.
that launched me into, I'm going to take it everywhere I go.
Sure.
I'm going to have these opportunities to supervise people, to be around people. And if it's professional, if it's personal, if it's my volunteer work, I want to introduce this to whoever I have, because what Don Clifton did, he's the father of strengths. His fixation was on human behavior. And so the assessment really goes into how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. And it's a measurement of that. So the intensity in which we do that. And that's what I really love, because that's all natural. It's innate to us. And so it
Yeah.
helps us be at our best day in, day out. And I love that environment where we understand it about ourselves and we understand it about each other, and we can foster that. And so again, that early on lack that I had in my first job of someone not understanding it for me and wanting that, that's then what has motivated me to bring it everywhere. And now I've been so fortunate that when I got to the NHC, the very first volunteer that I worked with is Lisa Humanick, and she's a longtime volunteer. She's been in each of the three entities volunteering for decades, and she has been a nonprofit executive, and she gets it too. And so she was like,
Sure.
"Have you heard of this little thing called Strengths Finder?" I'm like, "Things." And so we actually became certified together.
That's
Awesome.
great.
Yeah.
Yes, we had been using the tool for years and years, and then decided we wanted the NHC to be a strengths-based organization. So we launched it with the NHC, and then the sorority adopted it, and now the foundation has adopted it.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love it. I'm thrilled that that has been the adoption of strengths for us.
So have you so when I came to Sigma Kappa, for the very first thing they do, for those of you that are not on staff, who most of you, is that they send this to you right away. And I remember thinking, like, what is this? I thought it was like a personality quiz. And I was like, this is kind of, I'll do it, but like they're really making a big deal about it. And then we did it. And then actually everybody meets with Casey after to talk through the strengths because she's certified. So it makes sense. I'm wondering, I think there's a lot of benefits that I've seen out of it. I think it helped me really synergize with the team that I was just joining. How have you seen it like benefit Sigma Kappa for them to like know the details about their strength? Like each staff member, how have you seen that show up?
Sure, that's a great question, because I think that a lot of times when any employer finds a tool, they have the option of digging in and adopting it and making it a part of their culture, or they say, "Oh yeah, we use it," and they put it on a shelf.
Yeah.
Or they might I have been in places where they say they use strengths, and there's a nice fancy placard outside everyone's office, and their strengths are listed, and they don't actually adopt it. So for Sigma Kappa, and I will speak specifically for the NHC because that's my
Yeah.
jam,
Yeah.
that we what has benefited us is that it is a part of your onboarding. So you take the assessment. I want to be very clear, it is not a tool that we use for hiring. It is post hiring.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah,
yep,
absolutely.
it's not a selection tool. Gallup does have that. We don't use it for that. We use it as a tool for onboarding and helping the employee understand their strengths, where they sit at the table, and then who's sitting around the table with them, and the strengths of everyone else. That's why we make it very public. Here are our team's strengths. And what it does is it allows you to really understand what, again, you're naturally good at, but also it allows each employee the ability to form educated opinions. I know that sounds weird, but that's
Yeah.
true. It's information that you get about a person and how they are likely to show up,
Mhm.
because strategic is going to almost always show up this way, right? So when you understand what a person's top 5 strengths are, top 10 strengths are, all 34, then you know if they truly embrace their strengths and they come from a place of it day in, day out, they sit with it, they are aware of them, and they are operating from a place of strengths, then they are going for that near perfect performance using their strengths. So again, if when I'm coming from strategic, my team knows that if they have an issue to be solved and they come to me, they're relying on me to bring them multiple solutions, because I see patterns, I see options, I see obstacles, and I give them that so that they don't get stuck. That
Sure.
there's always
Yeah.
a way to get to an end result. That's what strategic does for me. And they recognize that because I have that and I sit with it, that I will bring that to them. With learner, they know, okay, if I go to Casey and I don't have all of the information that she's looking for, she's going to have questions
Yeah.
and I'm going to have to come back to her, right?
Mhm.
I have employees that have responsibility. And what I have learned with them is when tasked with responsibilities of their jobs, that how I interact with them on checking in, not to say, where are you with this? What's going on? Have you done it? But just, how can I support you? Do
Mhm.
you need anything else? Are
Yeah.
you stuck? Right? Not to hound them. I know with their responsibility strength, they will do what they say they will do and they will get the work done. And I'm going to trust that. I'm going to trust they're going to sit in that strength and utilize it. And I'm going to allow them to be at their best. And so I'm just going to support that. I'm going to feed that strength. And so, again, when you know your strengths and when you know the strengths of your coworkers, you can help everyone, yourself included, be at your best. And you understand what is expected of you and what you can expect of others in the work that you're doing. So in a lot of ways, it just kind of levels that field, right? You're
Absolutely.
all coming
Yeah.
in with an understanding of what to expect, what you're going to get, who's going to do what, sometimes how people are going to feel about it, who needs to be in the room. And so it just really, in my opinion, it makes doing work a lot easier and it takes a lot of guessing out of it because there are some fundamentals about strengths that are the truths. And
Yeah.
we can get into that in a little bit because that the truths about the strengths are always true, right? And again, if you're coming from a place of strength, then you know that everyone who is operating from a place of strength is going to try to be at their best all the time. And they're going to look for the best in other people that are sitting with their strengths too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was having a similar thought, Morgan, of just I thought graduating from college and starting my role here on Sigma Kappa right out of school, that I knew myself pretty well. And then
Sure.
I got here on my first day and they're like, hey, take this strengths assessment. And it was so funny because I am not a Sigma Kappa, and just the excitement on this first floor, that everyone was like, "Oh, Meredith's about to take her strengths," because they want to know that. And they
Right.
were like more excited for me because I had no idea what I was walking into. But then I got to the one-on-one meeting with Casey and I was like mind blown. Like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, now I understand why I show up this way, how I show up this way.
Mhm.
And it just like, and I've used this professionally, relationally, like just on my day to day. And it's been so great. So, Hannah, question for you.
Yeah.
Having been a collegiate member of Sigma Kappa, did you know your strengths before joining staff? And what did you learn after joining staff about your strengths?
Great question. I was really lucky to be a part of a university that uses strengths a lot in their leadership development programs. So I was an orientation leader and we took strengths for that class. And that was my first interaction with strengths. And I've had the same strengths since 2018. I haven't retaken the test. I'm sure Casey can go into the timelessness of strengths or how they may change over time. But I started to use my strengths as a member of Standards Council. A lot of my, strengths are in strategic thinking. And so being in those conversations, seeking to understand with my learner strength, being strategic in how I phrase my questions, I started to see, okay, I see how this is showing up. And then that knowledge of my strengths and how they show up has just exponentially multiplied since I've been on staff. The projects that I feel like I really excel in or the projects I gravitate to are all in strategic
Yeah.
thinking. And I'm very, blessed that all of the supervisors I've worked with and team members I've worked with, they recognize that in me and they'll be like, hey, let's pull Hannah into this or let's get Hannah's thoughts on this. And same with my team members, like I said, I'm very based in strategic thinking. I need someone's insight who has more of that relationship building strengths, those communicator strengths. And it's really cool for us to come together on a project, and I bring my superpower, they bring their superpower. And, we don't even need to talk about divvying up responsibilities. It's like, okay, Hannah's going to gravitate towards this, Lauren's going to gravitate towards that. And so it just makes things more efficient. It makes teams stronger. It makes the product stronger. And it's truly, truly great to work with an organization that has such a variety and diversity of strengths, because that just makes what we do that much better.
Yeah.
Right. That was a long answer.
No, that's okay.
Good
I totally agree. I think we've had many conversations with Casey as a communication team about like the projects that we get to use our strengths always make us feel more valued and just love our job that much more. And so glad to hear I don't get to spend much time talking to Hannah one-on-one about work. And so glad to know that that is true across the board, and that we can all rely on our strengths and just encourage one another to use our superpowers. And that was such a great way to explain it.
I think Casey already touched on this. Like, this brings a bunch of understanding to one another, because as positivity is one of my strengths, but that can sometimes show up like I don't care, because usually I'm like pretty giggly. I usually like, I'm smiling. But it's just because my outlook is typically like I'm putting a positive spin. There are things I'm obvious, like if there's something that comes up and it's big and detrimental, I'm taking it just as seriously, but the way that I will come across might seem a little bit more like, oh, like, well, Morgan just doesn't have a care in the world. And it's not true. I care a lot about most things, just on the record. So I think that like, getting that understanding and like other teams recognizing that as, oh no, she's just coming at it from a different angle, makes it so that there's not that like misconception of like, oh, this, like, it's not a judgment call. You don't get judged because you already have like this baseline, I think.
Absolutely.
Morgan, I think you bring up a great point, and that is that strengths also come with people's perceptions, right?
Yes,
and I think positivity is one of those strengths. Woo is another one.
I was just going to say woo. I always, when I first learned about woo, I was like, oh, that's fake. You change your personality to win people over. And it's like meeting Meredith, who is a true woo. And it's like
positivity.
Positivity. I'm like, no, there's nothing fake about this. Like, this girl is genuine to her core, and just has that natural ability to relate to people and develop trust almost instantly. And it's based on a good foundation, and sometimes makes me very jealous. I get strengths envy sometimes.
I get strength envy too, Hannah, because I have command and I have self-assurance. And a lot of times those get labeled arrogant or very cold, or, and so everything comes with a perception. And so we try to break down that barrier by articulating differently. And so I appreciate that, Morgan, that, when you're like, I have deep feelings and I care very deep. Because you have a positive outlook does not mean that you don't have a care in the world. It means you see the world differently. It means that you have an infectious nature, and that you can see optimism where some people see skepticism and negativism. So those strengths do come with perceptions that people have, that we want to make sure that we break those barriers.
Yes, absolutely. So you kind of started talking about it a little bit, but I feel like as we've been in this season of COVID-19 and just experienced so many changes the last year, and really, I think we've all talked about our transition from school to our first jobs, and just the continuous change and landscape that we go through life. So we're really going to spend this last half of the podcast talking about how we can utilize our strengths to navigate change. And so, Casey, just going to defer to you as the expert here. How do you see strengths playing a role when we navigate change and huge life changes?
I love this question because, one, I love change, but right, like in your personal life, most people do not want to see many changes, but professionally with the NHC, I have had 9 years of constant change because we've been evolving and growing and expanding our programs and our services. And so strengths has been the basis of that. And so I feel like this is a testimony, right, to why we have strengths, because here is a great case study and it will work.
Yep.
When we have the language of strengths, we can accurately articulate who we are, how we're going to show up, and where we want people to see us in their lives. And so when we do that, it diffuses difficult conversations and situations. And that's where I think change comes into it, is that change can be messy and difficult and unwanted. But when we start thinking about, okay, I naturally am strategic, so I can think about all the options of change. I am naturally positive, so I can think of the opportunities that change can bring,
Sure.
right? So if we start applying strengths to change and diffuse that messiness,
Yeah.
diffuse that awkwardness, then we do start seeing change as bearable. We start seeing change as doable, as manageable. And we could go down that full list of 34 and apply each strength for how we could manage through change.
Sure.
And interestingly enough, I did this with a client and I said, okay, let's just go through all 34. I know all 34 don't show up for us, but change is hard.
Yeah.
And let's
Yeah.
recognize that, right? It brings great challenge, but it also brings such opportunity. So let's find where those challenges are going to come from and where those opportunities are going to come from. And so we just started ticking them off, right? What work can be done? Let's go through all of those executing strengths. Okay, let's just start with let's achiever. We got to get a checklist together, right? We got to know what we're going to mark off and what we are going to be able to, when we're going to be able to put our head on the pillow because we have accomplishments, right? All the way through strategic thinking. And it was interesting because what we found, we really needed those influencing themes and those relationship building themes because we need people and we need communication.
Yeah.
And without those, like, you can get a lot of work done and you can get in a whole cycle of thinking through things, right? But you need people and you need to communicate. And that's what the beauty of strengths is too, is, and Hannah, I loved when you said, when you get together with your teammates and you look at who has what strengths and the differences, because that's where the
Yeah.
advantages
Yep.
are. And that's really what you want to do when you're facing change, is think about what variety of strengths do you have and how can you apply all of them to that change? Because what can you get from each strength when you're applying it to what it is that you need to change? And if you approach it that way, you will have a variety of options coming out of that change.
Yeah.
Casey, I'm curious, we just touched on situational change, but
Mhm.
how strengths relate to personal change. I've
Mhm.
heard people say that, strengths are timeless and the, top five you'll have, or the top five you'll have for the rest of your life. Some people say, you should retake strengths. What is your perspective on that for our friends who have taken it or maybe have not
Mhm.
yet?
Sure. So strengths are timeless. So at about the age of 14, your strengths are developed, because no different than, so let me think how to do this. So, you get your green eyes from your mom and your dad, right? That's a combination. You know that you get some dominant traits from one side of your family or the other. But your strengths are a combination of the environment that you're in and what gets nurtured. So when we're thinking about, um, there's no way, like, I develop and I continue to grow and I learn. So of course my strengths are going to continue to develop and grow, and they're going to be different. They're going to continue to develop for sure. They don't change. What I say, they shuffle.
Mhm.
So I
Okay.
encourage everyone to get their full 34 report. And if you want to see, if you want to debunk the myth that don't change, I'd say from about 15 to 1 through 15, again, they will shuffle, but they're not going to change.
Interesting.
And you have gone through what are considered life altering or perspective altering life changes, and in a quick order, right? So if you've gone through really traumatic events and they have completely changed your outlook on life in a dramatic way, that may have an impact on your strengths.
Yeah,
and I'll
sure.
give you an example. So I went through a pretty rough divorce, and it gave me a perspective check for sure.
Wow. Okay.
I think that 35-year-old Casey was very achiever driven, very I have a to-do list, I have goals, and I have, I would say I was more driven by things like getting things done, doing work.
Yeah.
And that's really driven by responsibility and maximizer.
Mm.
And today, having my life not really turn out the way that I thought it would, but turn out exactly the way that it is supposed to be. And actually
Mhm.
ever knowing I could be this happy, I am much more in tune with my relator
Yeah.
and learn and in knowing people and meeting people, and I didn't think that I needed that. And so my perspective has absolutely changed, but my strengths didn't.
Mm.
They have grown, and I
Got
viewed
it.
them in a different way. And so that my perspective didn't change my strengths. They just grew them. My awareness has grown in my strengths. Now, more devastating life changes may actually change someone's strengths. But again, I say that they shift because you may see, so if positivity was maybe number 10, and then you retake it and now it sits at number 6, that is true. Because your 1 through 10, actually the difference of intensity is pretty minimal.
Mm.
Because again, this is a measurement of how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. And so it's innate to you. So that intensity, some days it may be more or less, but your top 10, really the intensity is minimal. The differences.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Great.
Casey, I think we've had this conversation before because in my top 5 strengths, I have woo and relator, which tend to oppose one another.
Yes.
And so I find this to be true even in my top 5, that like I have to either pick my woo, which I don't think we've talked about is winning over others for those who don't know, and then the relator. And so I find this to be so true. Not surprised to hear you say that the top 10 will shift for that, because even in my top 5 alone, one is going to compete with the other.
Absolutely. And that does happen because they can be in contrast, and woo and relator are a great contrast because woo, your social network, your social ability to move between people and get them to understand and a little bit about you and connect with them very quickly is very important to you. That is influence to you. That is communication, and that is important to you. Whereas relator, that social awkwardness sits there. Like meeting someone new is uncomfortable. And so there is that innate retreat, you're backpedaling from new people. And so that's right, Meredith, you will tend to have to kind of pick, like,
Yep.
is this going to be uncomfortable, or can I just tiptoe in? So you might be doing a little cha-cha sometimes. A few people, and so that's what you're going to gravitate. You're going to be comfortable, and then you can get that woo on. I love a woo in my corner because I have relator, and I want a woo to bring me people. I want to woo to bring me one person that I can talk to and connect with. And then when that conversation's over, just bring me another person, and that is a perfect pairing. And so even when you have those two in your top five, that it still can be a perfect pairing. And that's the beauty of strengths too, is that they are all connected. They are not singular. They are not working separately. They all work in concert with each other. And so sometimes you are going to have to figure out, am I going to turn up that woo, turn up that relator? Am I going to have to use my woo first to figure out who I will then connect with on a
Sure.
more deep?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with those opposing traits, we've talked about this, like I said, at length, but I think sometimes we don't understand the opposite. And so we think we do have those negative perceptions,
Mhm.
which is something that I love when we get to have these staff conversations with
Yeah.
Casey, as you might think this, but this is the actual
Yeah.
truth behind it. And so Casey, can you just walk us through some of those conversations and how you can best work with others who might have a trait that you think one thing of, but how you can use that to your benefit?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So this gets into the truths about strengths, and these really helped me, especially when I didn't understand where someone was coming from, or if they had a strength that I had and it was showing up differently. So strengths are neutral. They're not good or bad. You can be just as much the poster child for good on one as you can the dark side of the strength, right? Because strengths have a bit of a dark side uh, when we're not aware, when we're not paying attention to it, or when we get stuck in that basement of that strength. But they're neutral. They're not good or bad. They just are. We are who we are. So strengths are neutral. They also, though, lead with positive intent. And that, I think, is what we miss the most, is that strengths are lead with positive intent. And so someone's strength, so a relator, me being awkward in new social settings, I'm not cold and distant. I'm not, I just, there is a shyness to me because it's uncomfortable. But my relator really does want to get to know you. I really have a friendship with you, and I want it to
Yeah.
be deep and meaningful, right? So my relator leads with positive intent. Sometimes it just doesn't show up that way. And
Mm.
so if I am aware of it and I know it, and if someone has, again, woo, they can pull that out of me because, again, they know that my positive intent is that I want a relationship. It's just not familiar. It is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They
That's so. Oh,
see.
I was gonna say that's so important. It's something about like, so I'm a big proponent of like, having a good community, a good group around you all the
Mhm.
time, which is, I'm like saying that I'm like, one of my strengths is includer. So that's probably,
That's it. That's
Checks
exactly.
out.
but I'm like, you need to have people that are different so that, every voice that comes to the table, like even if you have like very similar like core strengths, like if you have 4 out of 5 as somebody else, like I think that like we have another member on our team, her name Mallory. I think most people know her if they know staff.
Mhm.
She has intellection as one of her top strengths too, and I don't think we're not very similar at all because mine usually shows up as like I'm very like extroverted, outward spoken, but
Right.
she's a lot more like let me deeply think through it. I don't know all of her strengths, but I know that there's a big difference. Like we only have one in
Mhm.
common, but it shows up differently, and then that brings out like I think it brings out the best in both of us because then we're working together through this goal. But yeah, I'm big on like find the people, like work together, synergize, don't be afraid of differences, and yeah, it's just great.
That's it. That is it, Morgan, because the differences are our advantages. And
Yeah.
that if you have and recognize everyone's strengths, and also even if you have similar strengths or or in the same domain, you still need a variety to be well-rounded group,
Yeah.
right? And so, and people need people. That's fundamental. People
Yeah.
need people. Just like I said, you didn't just one day grow up, you are who you are. There were people around you. You always had people surrounding you, and some of them positively impacted you, some of them may have negatively impacted you, but they created an environment, and that has impacted who you are today. And you still need people because we have blind spots.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know if we're showing up the way that we think that we're showing up. And so we need these connection points, and we need to be able to say, am I being at my best? I need to be at my best. Can you help me? Can you help me with my awareness? This is what I think I'm doing. And that is not just in the workplace. That's in our relationships. That's in our friendships, whether you're romantic with someone. And I think the other thing that what I love about strengths and what helps me best understand others and their strengths is that they are not labels. So
Yeah.
no different than, those check boxes that you have on an application, or there's not one thing. It's not, I am not just strategic. I am not just relator. I am not just command. I have this wide variety of words that go into what make up my strengths
Right.
that I get to use. And with understanding and awareness, not only do I get to know myself, I get to know other people. And the more aware that we are, and the higher level of understanding that we have of the strengths around us, the better we are for each other, because I
Yeah.
go back to people need people. We
Yeah.
just
I'm going to pick on Hannah a little bit here, just because I know Hannah well and know her story. So Hannah just moved to Carmel, Indiana, almost a year ago now.
A year ago. Mhm.
In the middle of the pandemic. And so we talked about people need people, but Hannah, how did you use your strength as you were navigating that big life change? And then how did you find others to help you who had maybe different strengths to help you navigate your change?
Great question. So my top strength is input. And so I want to give advice, but I want to get advice from others, whether that's, online communities or people on staff. And so a lot of my first emails to people on staff were, what recommendations do you have for
Yeah.
doctors' offices? What recommendations do you have for nonprofit organizations or restaurants to go to? Like, I wanted to get their expert opinion on this new place that I was living in, so that it could inform, where I went, what doctors I was seeing. And like, that was that was an obvious step to me. I didn't even think and question, like, oh, why am I sending this email? Like, why is this what I'm asking? My first questions that I'm asking, but it's like, oh, it's input showing up. And then I think strategic, just, trying to meet as many people as possible in those intro meetings, doing my homework, reading through past files so that I was showing up to those meetings informed and ready to go, and asking probably too many questions that they were wanting to answer or expecting to answer.
I love it. Hannah, you mentioned earlier that, you're really heavy on that strategic thinking side, and that, not so much on the relationship building or anything. But that's the beauty too, is that you have figured out how to build those relationships by utilizing your thinking themes and by asking questions and engaging people in a way. And again, that's the beauty of strengths, is that they're all connected, and we can move through what we need to do by utilizing our strengths, because you don't have to have a strength in every single domain, so you don't have to have one in executing, one in relationship building, one in influencing it, and one in strategic thinking, in order to do those things. Because of course we all think, we all do, we all communicate and influence, and we all build relationships. It's a matter of how we do it. And so, just, you nailed it, Hannah. Your input is what helped you establish relationships by asking questions of people, getting to know what they do, so that you could understand them, and getting help from them, right? Like, that is, it also, that connects them to you, like, oh, that's so nice that she's asking me, right? Like,
And if they didn't know my strengths, they would just assume I was nosy. But if you look at my email signature, which, if you've ever received an email from someone who works for a Sigma Kappa entity, you see our strengths at the bottom of our email signature. Be, oh no, like, Hannah's a strategic thinker. That's how she approaches problems, is by asking all of the questions.
Yes.
Casey, before we wrap up here, you briefly mentioned the categories that each strength lie in. Can you kind of just briefly explain those, and then also how some strengths can show up in those other buckets?
Sure. So yes, while strengths are not labels, what Clifton did was he categorized them for how we get work done. So that's the executing domain. So there are four of them: how we influence and communicate with people, how we build relationships, and how we think through, how we process data. That's strategic thinking domain. So there are four. And so in that executing domain, that's where you're going to see how people get that work done. So achievers in there, responsibility, belief. So it's what guides getting work done. So putting together the big picture, so then you see what all the details are, making sure that you know what drives you, what's motivating you to get work done. In the influencing and communication domain, that's where you're going to find communication, competition, command, significance. That is truly influencing. So, how are we hearing people? How are we telling that story? How are we making sure that the voices are represented and then communicated out? So, it's important that all four of these domains are represented, especially in group work or in family dynamics. So you want to be mindful of, representing it. In relationship building, this is where we have connectedness, positivity. We have all relator and individualization. So this is how we build and maintain relationships, how we connect with people, how we interact. And really, when we think of individuals and groups and the things that connect us and make sure that the whole, right, the greater good is bigger and better than just individuals, right? So we want to recognize the individual contribution that each person makes, but that we're also looking out for the whole.
Absolutely.
And strategic thinking is that processing of the data. So how we're thinking through, how we're collecting. So there's input, there is strategic, there's intellection and analytical. So this is gathering the information, sometimes looking at past information, analysis, and then mapping out. So ideation is in there, futuristic, seeing the world in a better place and understanding how to get there. And so the beauty of those four domains is that they also all work in concert, right? So you want to, you might have to think through what are all the components needed. So when we go back to this whole change concept, right? How do we manage change? Let's think about it. What is it that is changing, and what are those components that are needed? Okay, so we're mapping out all of everything around us that is changing. And now who do we need around us to manage this change? Okay, what's needed? Who are the people? Now let's think about how are we going to communicate the change that we're going through? So how can we influence? How can we bring people along? How can we inspire people to change with us? And now build that plan. Let's get the to-do list. Let's build that plan. So that's when you think about the advantages, in the differences of strengths. That's why you want a great representation of strengths at the table when you are going through change, when you're doing a work project, when you are in your family and when you're trying to make decisions as a family, when you're in a relationship, right?
Sure.
You to recognize that differences in strengths really can bring about the advantages. And when you have those four domains that are represented, it will bring about a well-rounded outcome because, again, you're thinking, you're doing, you're relating, and you're influencing.
Yeah. That's great. So just want to thank you both so much. I love this overarching theme of the strengths. I think that we all can work together. We can find the positivity and not the positivity. That's me speaking. We can all find the positives in one another and, just work to a better end goal. And as we're talking about change and how things are moving and shifting in our lives, just keeping that perspective really clear. So again, I want to thank you so much, Casey, for coming on here as our resident Clifton Strengths expert. We're so appreciative. And Hannah, we're so happy to have you on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And yeah, we actually had Hannah join us today as our guest co-host because speaking of change, I have found a new job and will be leaving staff. So this will be my last podcast. So you can expect to hear Hannah's voice a little bit more as she helps Morgan and continues to help move the podcast forward.
Yeah, we're
Meredith, I am so excited for you. I'm so sad for Sigma Kappa, but I know wherever you go, you're going to be so successful, and I wish you well. Hannah, this is interesting because I was just sitting here thinking, I wonder if Hannah ever does podcasts. She's got a podcast.
Listen to a lot of podcasts.
This is such a surprise and so exciting. I'm so happy. This is great.
Yeah, so we all love Meredith, so we're all sad to see her
Yes.
go. But we're
Thank
just so excited for the change in her life, the big positive change of what's to come. And yeah, Hannah's amazing. She's just great. First of all, we wanted to have her on forever, so this is just a good opportunity to get her on.
Thank you.
I wish both of you the best. These are great changes for both of you, and I hope that what the strengths that you need to take you forward, and that your the whatever outcomes that you want with them, that you get them.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I'm excited for Meredith to take her superpower strengths to this new transition in her life. And luckily, for those of you who don't know, Meredith and I are neighbors, so she is not getting rid of me yet.
That's awesome.
Thank you all so much for listening. If you need any more news about Sigma Kappa and any of our events, please visit sigmakappa.org for more information or follow us on our social media channels. It's so great talking with you today. Have a great one.